The word legend is so overused and so overhyped, but when the real thing comes along, everyone knows it.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone to this very special episode of The Buyer's Mind. I'm your host, Jeff Shore. You can read the full bio in the show notes, or you can visit jeffshore.com. Make sure you check out our events page, especially if you're a real estate professional. We can absolutely rocket ship your career trajectory if you give us just a couple of days. So Murph, if we got a show today, how excited are you about today's episode?
I am so excited. I can't wait for the knowledge bombs that are going to come on today's show.
Today, we will be joined by the one and only Seth Godin, marketing genius, entrepreneur, disruptor, sage, author, speaker, and as it turns out, a really, really good guy. Seth Godin and I had the opportunity to chat a little bit offline. I asked him for a little career advice, frankly, and he was so generous with his time. He's a really good person. So in addition to everything else, just really looking forward to that interview. Before we get there, we'll give you our quote of the day coming from Seth Godin. I love this quote. Either you are going to tell stories that spread, or you are going to become irrelevant. I love that. Either you're going to tell stories that spread or you're going to become irrelevant. Look, Seth Godin is much more than a marketing guy, right? He is a philosopher, and a good one at that, because the quote I just read applies to sales and marketing, but it also applies to life. Look, at Shore Consulting, we're all about the story. We talk about this all the time. In sales, the only story that really matters is the story that your customer is going to tell after they leave. But there's a bigger story here. It's what is your life story? Seth Godin says either you are going to tell stories that spread or you're going to become irrelevant. And you've got to ask yourself the question, what is your big story? What is the story of you? What story do you want to tell? And I want to encourage you, follow Seth's work, read his blog, go to YouTube and type in Seth Godin. You're going to see him interviewed over and over again with nuggets that will help you not just to become a better sales and marketing professional, but to live a better life. We want to let you know that the podcast is brought to you in part by our good friends at Home Street Bank. This is our show sponsor, but this is also my lender of choice. I used Home Street in my last home purchase, and it was the smoothest transaction I've ever had. And I've purchased quite a few homes, but they were professional, dependable, great rates, great service. If you're a real estate professional, you're just not going to find anybody better when it comes to taking care of your clients. So if it's banking or home loans or credit lines, whatever it is, go to homestreetbank.com. You can learn more about it, homestreetbank.com. Well, before we get to our interview, let me give you our sales tip of the day, and it is to find unique, personalized value. This is one of the themes that I have learned from Seth Godin over time, that you need to know your customer so well that you can provide them with unique, personalized value. And over again, what we find is that sales and marketing practitioners, they're trying to peddle generic value. Oh, this is my product, or this is my idea, or this is my concept, and it's so great. Who wouldn't love it? Well, here's an idea. How about the person standing in front of you right now? Perhaps they wouldn't love it. So how do you know? How do you know that what you're going to provide is going to be unique, personalized value? And I think the answer to that is to know your customer so well that you can do that because you have first gone on a value hunt. You have got to know your customer by way of understanding what matters to this person. And it may have nothing to do with the product that you are representing. What matters to this person? How can I go on that search to provide unique value to that individual? Well, before we get to our interview, let me tell you about an opportunity. I want to invite you to join us for the Jeff Shore Sales Leadership Summit and Expo in order for you to become a better leader for your team, to grow in ways that you never thought possible, and to take your career to an entirely new level. This is a premier industry gathering that centers around real estate leaders. Now, we've had people who are in other industries attend the summit, and they've never been disappointed. But just be aware that We're going to speak in the language of real estate leaders. You're going to learn from the best of the best about what it takes to make you a better leader, a better manager, a better coach, with more insights, more actual strategies, more aha moments than ever before, entirely new material that we have been working very, very hard on behind the scenes. You're going to come away from the summit confident that you possess the tools and the knowledge not only to succeed, but to truly change your world. It is an amazing experience, and I want you there. Go to jeffshore.com/events to learn more about the Jeff Shore Sales Leadership Summit and Expo. Well, you're most likely already familiar with our guest today, and if you're not, boy, you are seriously missing out. He's one of the most prominent, accurate, and I believe prescient voices in marketing of our generation. Author of 18 books, founder of several companies, including Yo-Yo Dine and Squidoo, and most recently, altmba.com. Perhaps the most popular blog in the world, which I love because Seth's blog is, I suspect, interested in just one thing, and that is getting me to think. Seth Godin leaves room for me to think. So it's a thrill to have him on the show. Seth Godin, welcome to The Buyer's Mind.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. It's a pleasure.
Let's start with some professional context here. Most people would accurately refer to you as a marketing guru, a savant, wonk, whatever you want to call it, but you can most definitely hold your own in a conversation about sales. In your opinion, is there a clear line of demarcation between the two disciplines, or are they more sort of two sides of the same coin?
Well, I'm not sure I want to own the guru thing. And because I've defined marketing as everything, that gives me a lot of leeway to talk about stuff.
Fair enough.
Marketing is what we do and how we do it, who we do it with, why we do it, the side effects we leave behind, the changes that we make. Mm-hmm. And I believe that sales are a critical component because sales is what happens when a human being engages directly with the fear that another human being is experiencing. That if people didn't have fear, we wouldn't need salespeople.
Fair enough. And so on that deeper level, even in preparing for this conversation, I got a hold of a great book from some 20 years ago called If You're Clueless About Selling. So I picked that up, and I'm sure it's been a while since you've read the book, but I have to tell you, it's aged quite well. You'll be glad to know. I don't know if you even remember some of your early books at this point, because you've written 18, I think perhaps more, but do you even go back and think about your early books at this point?
Well, so just to fill people in, there's this job called book packager. And what book packagers do is what movie producers do for movies. And so I made 120 books when I was a book packager. I made books on gardening and business and the secret power of your name and 100 things in between. So it was a lot of fun to do that. And some of the books I wrote myself, and some of the books I just made happen in the world. In the case of If You're Clueless About Selling, I had my hands in it, but I can't confess to have written every word of that book.
I'm still going to give you credit. Again, because it aged really well. There's no question. And there's one important mindset point from that book, and I'm going to paraphrase. But you say in the book that if you feel like you are asking your customer for a favor when you're trying to sell something, you're probably doing it wrong. That's an interesting take.
Yeah, I wrote that. It's true. The reason that so many people hesitate to go into sales is because they feel that selling is asking for a favor. And the idea that for a living, you would bother people, whether it's people you know or people you don't, and constantly handle them to get them to do something for you is an unsavory way to spend your day. The alternative is to realize that no one in a free market buys something unless it's worth more to them than it costs. In essence, everything is on sale. Everything is a bargain. That you pay $3 for a bottle of water because it's worth $5. You donate $1 million to charity because it's worth $2 million to you to do so. And if you look at it that way, then the salesperson's job is to create communication so that value is created. Not just value created for the salesperson, but value is created for the customer. And if no value is created, then all you're doing is bothering people and you're not really a salesperson.
This would explain a conversation you had with Dan Pink on his HubSpot show, Sell Like a Human. We're going to have Mr. Pink on the show in a couple of weeks here, but you mentioned that salespeople should be selling a product that people are lined up for. And we all know that for most products and services that are sold, there's no line. So justify that out there for us, please.
Well, the deal is you only get tomorrow once, and you don't get to do it over. And you can work for anyone you want to if they are able to see the value that you create. So if you're busy selling a product that people don't want to buy and creating discomfort as you do so, I think you should sell something else. And this choice of selling the thing you believe in as opposed to rolling your eyes and dealing with it every day for the rest of your life, I think the choice is pretty clear. And if you're a good salesperson, then there'll be a line out the door for you, to hire you, to get you to be the person who represents this product. If you're not a good salesperson, well, the good news is that people like Jeff Shore will help you become a better salesperson. And that's how you elevate your game. I mean, if you think about it, if someone was a lousy surgeon and their patients died on the table all the time, I don't think it would be interesting to hear them whine about how hard it was for them to get patients. Right? We'd say, well, the reason you're having trouble getting patients, you keep killing people. Why don't you just get better at being a surgeon? And I think the same thing is true for salespeople. Being the salesperson of last resort, selling the product no one else wants to sell, getting the jobs where you only get paid on commission and you're barely scraping by because you're selling lousy stuff to people who don't want it. Well, that's your choice, and you should make a different choice, because selling is a profession. And like all the professions, we should do it in a way that we're proud of.
It might just be that low barrier to entry into sales that gets people stuck into it. But obviously, as somebody who's been working with sales professionals for about 3 decades now, I know I can spot somebody and say, you are in the wrong line of work. And unfortunately, you've been in it so long that you don't think you have anything else left in you. But there's no question I want to grab people by both shoulders from time to time and shake them up and tell them you need to go find something else to do. Talk about your admiration for a moment for Zig Ziglar. We share that admiration for sure. Where did that begin, and what made the man so different from your perspective?
Zig was my friend and my mentor, my teacher. We worked together briefly. My dad used to listen to a lot of cassettes, some of which I rolled my eyes about, like the Cato Institute nonsense. But he also had these Zig tapes. It was like 1983. I was 23 years old, 25, somewhere in there. And I listened to one, and it took me a little while to get past the cornball accent and the storytelling. But then I got hooked on it completely. And when I became an entrepreneur in 86, the first 8 years were very, very difficult. It was hand to mouth all the time. And I would listen to Zig between 1 and 2 hours every day, day after day. Sometimes I would get in my car just to listen to Zig. And the only reason I didn't quit was because he had my back. And you don't forget something like that. And there was a while when I could do any one of his stories by heart. I couldn't really do the accent that well, but I knew every single story. I once rearranged a trip to stop in St. Louis on my way just so I could get my shoe shine by Johnny the Shoeologist, whose story is told about halfway through Secrets of Closing the Sale. And, for me, what Zig did, and I think he was able to successfully do this at least 96% of the time, was not view selling as manipulation, not do selling something we do to people, but do it as something we do with people. And that generosity comes through in so many of the stories. And what that unlocked for me was being able to see patterns, the patterns of fear that people have when they hesitate, the patterns that salespeople get stuck into, and how they can move into a different spot. And after the selling tapes, I moved on to the goal setting, the motivation, the rest of it. And I had 72 hours that I listened to over and over again. Then he and I became mail correspondents. And then one day I got a gig in front of 23,000 people in Milwaukee, and it was him and me and Gerald Ford. What a combo. And then I was lucky enough to publish his goal-setting planner, which we rebuilt from scratch. And that was one of the last projects he ever did before he died.
Wow, just amazing. I saw him speak. I never had a chance to personally meet the man. I saw him speak several times. Like you, just played the cassettes as many times as I could, and I agree. I could recite some of the stories still to this day. But I agree also that he brought a nobility to what it is that we do in sales, if your motives are right. And I think that's one of the things that gets us tripped up, is that for some people there's kind of an icky factor about sales. And it probably means you're doing it wrong. It probably means you are trying to be manipulative along those lines. The other thing that I look at in sales, and I want to get your take on this, is that when people say, if you say to somebody at a wedding reception, a cocktail party, an airplane, I'm in sales, you're always going to hear someone say, oh, I couldn't do it. I tried sales. I just can't do that. And my gut reaction says that the single biggest issue is not intelligence or personality. It's probably how they deal with discomfort. It's the fact that if you are in sales, you're going to find yourself in uncomfortable situations, and you're going to want to hit the abort button and get out of that. Do you agree with that take?
Well, I'll share two Zigisms here that I think might be relevant. The first one is this. He quotes a study years ago that the single best way to tell if someone is going to succeed as a life insurance salesperson is by looking at how much life insurance they own. And for me, whatever you sell is optional. You could sell something else. So if you are in a corner where you're going to have to exert social or other pressure to create the tension to get someone to buy something from you that you actually don't think they should buy, that you're doing it for the commission, then you're not a professional. And I think you should walk away from that. Mm-hmm. And you should walk away from that product, or at the very least, walk away from that customer. That the power of being able to say to a customer, you're right, it's not for you. Here's a phone number of someone who sells something other than what I sell. Good luck with them, because it will be better for you. That's what a professional salesperson does. Mm-hmm. And the story that I'll tell you, and it has a lot of nuance, so I'll tell you the very brief version, is Zig relates the story of selling cookware, and he's calling on a family with a guy who has 8 daughters. And the guy's got a lot of social capital in town, so if he can close this guy, a lot of other people will buy from him. And he goes through all the benefits, and he goes through how much money it's going to save the guy. And at the end of the thing, the guy says to him, look, you've shown me it's going to save me money, but let me tell you something, Mr. Ziglar. And then he points to the chest pocket of his overalls. He says, I have 8 daughters, and you may have noticed we don't have a bathroom in this house. We have an outhouse. And for the last 8 years, I've been saving up money so my daughters can have indoor plumbing. And then he says, Mr. Ziglar, let me tell you something. Not you nor any other cotton picking, fast talking salesperson is going to take that money from me and my daughters. I got the money right here, and we're going to go build that bathroom. And Zig looks at him, closes his case, and says, you're absolutely right, sir. Good luck with that. And he is in town the next day, and someone comes up to him and says, boy, I don't know what you said to Bob, but he's really mad at you. And Zig says, what do you mean? He said, well, Bob was ready to buy the cookware. He just wanted to know you believed in it, and you wouldn't sell it to him. And Zig then relates that he thought about this about 1,000 times, and then he realized what actually was going on. And what was going on is Bob was saying, look, I used to have a problem. My problem was I didn't have enough money to buy the outhouse, but now I do. I got the money right here. And you're selling this cookware on credit, and now I can afford to buy it on credit because I already took care of my outhouse problem. But in that moment, Zig didn't believe enough in the value of what he was selling to be able to say to this guy, I hear you, and this is going to pay for itself in 4 months for your family. So yeah, let's do this together. And I think that is the insight of what it means to have empathy. Not the empathy for the fear someone might be feeling right now, but the empathy for how they're going to feel a month after you leave the room.
It's not so much of a gut check then as it is a soul check at this point. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you still got to live with yourself. You still got to sleep at night. You still have to be able to look at it and say, I gave it my best. I did the right thing for that particular customer.
That's right. And it's in a capitalist society with so much cultural brainwashing, we have made it ever easier for people to believe that it's okay to sell toys that hurt kids, not too many kids, or dump toxic waste in the love canal or whatever, because we can rationalize it. And yes, in fact, many people can sleep at night. But I'm pushing for a standard here that says it turns out the very best salespeople, the most effective ones, the highest compensated ones, don't cut corners. They actually do better because they are trusted and trusting.
All right, so similar topic then. You sat down with Marie Forleo and basically shredded the idea of finding your calling. Can you kind of replay that conversation a little bit? Because it was really, really interesting. And again, so contrarian from what you hear from so many people from the stage.
Yeah, well, it's so tempting to say, do what you love, to say to people, go on this quest, follow your journey, listen to that voice in your head and do what you love. Well, until really recently in the scheme of things, you couldn't make a living as a musician. You couldn't make a living as a writer. You couldn't make a living as a nonprofit organizer. You couldn't make a living doing all of those things people love. That's pretty new. Way more interesting to me and way more effective is the idea to love what you do. That if you can love what you are able to get paid to do, if you can find in that the calling of helping and connecting and leading, then you're guaranteed to love what you do every day. Because you're not waiting for the perfect scenario and structure. You are, in fact, saying, if I do work that I can be proud of, I can decide to love that.
Let me just push back just a little bit, because in my mind, there's a little bit there, says the man who has found his calling and basically can do anything that he wants to do. I mean, we're not all Seth Godin here.
Well, but I wasn't Seth Godin for a really long time. And, when I got 800 rejection letters in a row and was eating macaroni and cheese to survive, the question is, when you are making the pitch and the person rejects you, do you look at that as a personal indictment and that you're one step closer to jumping off a bridge? Or do you say, how fascinating. I just learned another thing about how people decide not to buy something. I just learned one more insight into what was missing from the way I wanted to tell my story. That I had a really hard decade, but I loved it every day because the craft was something I could control. And there have been times that I've had to sit there and, copy edit something because the copy editor didn't show up, and I'm bad at copy editing, and copy editing gives me a headache. And I could curse the fact that I'm sitting there copy editing something when I'm incompetent to do so, and it's taking me twice as long. Or I could say, wow, what a privilege that I get to do this, and I'm not outdoors in the rain, and I'm building something that years from now, Jeff is going to say, I read that book you wrote about selling 24 years ago. Right? So it's a narrative choice. And the narrative choice is the key, because as Pressfield has pointed out about the resistance, we're all afraid. We're all trying to hide. We're all constantly in this dilemma of how do we be seen and not be seen at the same time. And one of the best ways I know to hide and not bring your full self to the table is to say, well, this isn't my calling. This isn't what I was born to do. So now you got the perfect excuse, because anything that scares you, you can now define as, oh, that wasn't what I was born to do. And I think that's the mistake. Yeah.
I think Zig would have been proud of that answer. Love it very much. Let's shift to marketing here just a little bit. How much do you think AR and VR are going to change the way we shop and the way that we buy? Or are there other more prominent disruptors that you see headed our way?
The debate and discussion about the next big thing has been going on in my life since I became a technologist 30 years ago.
Well, with all due respect, you put yourself in that position, right? You early on, you sort of set the world on fire to look at it and say, if you don't see what's coming, folks, and you were right, by the way.
Yeah, it's nice to be right. And the thing is, the next big thing is already here. And we are becoming distracted by new big things. So let me explain. That what happened in 1986 is the world changed and traditional mass marketing started to falter. And attention became scarce, and you couldn't steal it anytime you wanted. We got rid of the while you were out pad. We got rid of voicemail. We got rid of B2B mail that people actually read. So all of that shifted to this model of permission marketing, talking to people who want to be talked to, selling to people who want to be sold to, getting enrollment and engagement. And I wrote that book in 1998. It came out in 99. So, we're closing in on the 20th anniversary. That hasn't changed, and it's not going to change for years. So we can say, oh, no, I'm going to wait for this big revolution in AR or VR. And I think things will happen there. And I think AI is even bigger, as long as we're doing 2-letter abbreviations. AI is going to change our world fundamentally. But for the people listening to this podcast, it's all irrelevant. Because for the people listening to this podcast, what we have is what we got, and what we got is going to be here for a long time, which is who trusts you, who's listening to you, and who would miss you if you were gone. Because if you don't own that asset, right? How many people would give you an instant yes if you sent them an email? How many people would open an email if you sent it to them? How many people who haven't heard from you are wondering where you are? That asset is the one we get to build for the rest of our careers. And then AI is going to put us all out of work, but I think that's 20 years from now. And in the meantime, I think we want to not get distracted by the latest iteration of tech. If you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, if you look at Snapchat, you look at Insta, they're all the rage, but it's the same principle. And the principle is attention is priceless. What are you doing with yours?
What's on your horizon? What's getting you most excited in the months or just the couple of years right in front of us?
Well, I've been a teacher my whole career, and now I'm shifting my teaching from books to online courses that are transformative. They're not really courses, they're workshops. And we run 2 right now, the Alt MBA, which is changing the lives of people in 40 countries, and something called the Marketing Seminar, which a lot of salespeople have been taking. And each one is a real commitment, and they involve peer-to-peer learning in a way that's transformative. So I'm spending most of my time on those 2 things. And then we're publishing a book in February by a woman named Kat Hoke, who runs Defy Ventures, which is a nonprofit. We are donating everything we're doing for her. And if you visit defyventures.org, I think it will be life-changing for a lot of people. Kat is a world-class salesperson. Kat could easily sell pajamas to a cat. She's just an extraordinary human being, and I'm so proud of the work she does.
Love it. Love it. His name is Seth Godin. You can go to sethgodin.com for, well, first of all, you want to be following his blog. It's the best blog, I believe, that's out there. It's a quick read, but it gives you room to think, which I like about it more than anything else. You can also go to altmba.com to learn more about what Seth is up to. What a great privilege to have the great Seth Godin on the show. Thanks for being on The Buyer's Mind.
Keep making a ruckus, Jeff. The work matters. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. So generous with his time, so generous with his insights. And Murph, I just love the fact that Seth Godin he's so straightforward with the way he speaks. He doesn't speak like, I'm this great orator who's measuring every word. He speaks from the gut, and then brilliance comes out.
He's a down-to-earth guy. And I think that's what we all really appreciate about the fact that when he shares something, it's not pontificating. It's where we live.
He's known as a marketing guy, but clearly he knows his sales stuff. He's thought about this a lot. But I love it because he approaches it from that perspective of what service are you providing? How are you best serving your customer? And you sort of get that sense that to Seth Godin, if you feel like you're pitching your customer on something that they don't really want in the first place, you really got to find another line of work.
And that makes me think of the Zig Ziglar quote, you can get everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want. And so you can see the fingerprints of Zig Ziglar all over the life of Seth Godin, right? I also like the idea of where he went with talking about where future trends are going. Whether it's AI or VR or anything else, it really doesn't matter. It's really what the technology is now.
Yeah, and I asked him that question because he has always been that predictor of the disruptor, right? He always sees what's going on. Even here, he was talking about AI and how AI is going to change things. A little bit ominous to say that AI is going to put us all out of work in 20 years, as he just sort of threw that out there as a sidelight. But you're right. The key that he was looking at was more along the lines of, what are you doing today? How are you living intentionally? And I see that. I've heard him interviewed, and as a matter of fact, Seth Godin and I were talking about this offline. He is very intentional about what he's going to do and what he's not going to do. One thing that Seth Godin has done, he has learned how to say no. He has learned how to prioritize his own life, and that makes him I think somebody that we all want to follow, because it's something we would all like to do to some extent. I also just love that Seth Godin approaches the idea of always, how do you stay true to yourself? And to me, this is from our side conversation and from the interview that we just had. That's what I'm stuck with as I'm thinking about Seth's conversation. How do you stay true to yourself? How do you be the person that you really want to be? And how do you serve people in the way that they want to be served? You get the sense from talking to him that he sees the world of sales and marketing as a very noble thing to do if your motives are right, if your intention is right. And if your motives are not right, if your intentions are not right, then get the hell out of the sales and marketing business. If you think it's dirty, if you think it's tricky, if you think it's manipulative, if you don't believe in your product, if you don't think you provide a valuable service, you shouldn't be here. You just shouldn't be here. I appreciate the very down-to-earth, straightforward approach that he takes, and that, quite frankly, I agree with. Again, my thanks to Seth Godin for being on The Buyer's Mind. Well, let me wrap it up with a quote from, you're not going to believe this, Seth Godin. This is what he says, and I just absolutely love this. He says, "Your turn. Imagine that the world had no middlemen, no publishers, no bosses, no HR folks, no one telling you what you couldn't do. If you lived in that world, what would you do? Go do that." That's what Seth Godin says. If you lived in that world where there are no middlemen, no bosses, no one telling you what you couldn't do, if you lived in that world, what would you do? Go do that. And Seth Godin is the type of person who has done that, and I feel challenged to be able to think the same lines. What is it? What if I lived in that kind of world, what would I do? And that's what I need to do. I just want to challenge you to look at it. It doesn't mean that you need to quit your job in sales and go become some, guru Sherpa for. It doesn't mean that you have to completely transform your vocation. But even in what you are doing, what does that look like when you are your highest and best self? What does that look like? How do you live the life that you are supposed to live? Hey, sales leaders, if you do not really dig putting together your sales meeting every week, if that's a chore for you, here's an idea. Let me do that for you. All you have to do is send an email to all of your salespeople and tell them, I want you to listen to this episode, whatever episode that is. Listen to this episode of The Buyer's Mind on your way to the sales meeting. They can do it in the car on the way to the sales meeting, and then just tell everybody, bring one thought, one thing that stuck out with you, and we're just going to go around the table. I'm telling you, that's a good half-hour discussion right there on the topic that you choose. So just look through the list of everything that we talk about on The Buyer's Mind, find a topic that you think is going to work, send it out to your salespeople, listen to this podcast on your way to the meeting, and then we'll talk about it during the meeting. You can do this once a month and have a great conversation that will keep everybody engaged on a topic that's going to be really relevant to the way they do business. So there you are. It's an idea for you sales managers. Thanks as always for listening to The Buyer's Mind. Now go out there, everybody, and change someone's world.